there, students. This is my bedroom where most of my grading gets done because it's so comfy. I'm sorry I had to cancel class on Thursday. Just a minor emergency at my school's son as he wasn't following directions, but whatever. Kids will be kids. And what I want to do is this lecture over video and upload it to YouTube so that way we don't get behind, because the winter quarter is so short as it is. So you can follow along to this. It's under Greeks. The Greeks and all they did for us, I think, on PolyLearn. But basically we're going back to the basics. So we're going back to Athens, 5th century BCE. And it's really important to start there. And I truly believe that we can't know where we are now unless we go back to where it started. And one of the things that Greece did in the 5th century BCE was they formed a democracy. Now, it didn't look like our democracy at all, but it was the beginnings of democracy. And because of that, they instituted court reform. So let's say, you were caught stealing a goat. What was eye for eye then? Your hand would be cut off, and you didn't have a word to say about it. And with this court reform came the idea that you, if you were caught with a goat, could defend yourself. Okay. However, there were no lawyers. And if you think about it today, how many of us would go to court for, a minor possession, a DUI, anything, right? And not get an attorney. And we definitely live in times that are way better than the 5th century BCE. But what they realized that is communication is power. Okay, so that's really important. So along come the first of many different groups, but the most important, and that was a sophist. And they were the first speech teachers. Because if you couldn't go to court with an attorney, and that was unheard of back then you would hire, if you had the money, a speech teacher who would guide you through what you were supposed to say during court. They traveled all over the not the world, but beyond Greece, and so they believed in provisional or probable knowledge, which is the knowledge that we can only know, and they were relativists. So a relativist today, we're all relativists today, and if you look at our law, if you look at just murder, how many different types of murder are there, right? It's just not murder, I was defending my house, murder, you're going to jail, right? And they believe that human nature is shaped by social circumstances, which we now, I think, all agree, but they were the first ones to say it. But they were incredibly expensive, okay? One of the main things about the sophists to remember is they didn't have very many morals or ethics. They really just wanted to win the case, okay? So you could come to them and say, yeah, I stole 10 goats and I don't care. And they didn't care either. They just wanted to teach you how to use your language in a manipulative way to get you out of, whatever the punishment was. So there are a couple of sophists that are really important, and the first one is Protagoras. He believed that morals are not universal and absolute, okay? And that our experience is limited by our senses, and that only by persuading can we feel that we know anything. Okay, so we all know that now, but he was the first one to say it. He was also the first one to say man is the measure of all things. And that's great, but his biggest contribution was he realized both the speaker and the audience influenced the outcome of a discussion. And we know this. If you've taken your speech class, you know that the people who did really well engaged the audience, right? And the people who did really poorly, looked down and pretended like there wasn't an audience. So that's what he's great for. The second guy that's really important is Gorgias. He believed a lot of things, and you can look at this, and he has a little riddle of thought and existence are not the same. He believes that nothing exists, and if you ever take a philosophy class, I'm sure you'll go over him. But the one thing that he's most famous for is he emphasized the power of rhetoric, both verbally and non-verbally. And if you've taken speech, I don't know the exact quote, but I think it's something like 80% of communication is nonverbal communication, which is why I use my hands a lot, or when you're talking to someone, and we just tend to tell a lot about what's going on without even saying anything. And this was like breaking news in the 5th century BCE. Okay, so that was really important. And then we get to Isocrates. And what makes Isocrates so important is that he defined himself with the he was a sophist, but he believed the sophists were ambulance chasing, didn't have ambulancism, but you get it, money hungry people who didn't really care at all about human truth. And he actually defended himself with his treatise against the sophists. So he stressed that the students at his school needed 3 things to learn: a natural aptitude, which is inborn, knowledge and training granted by teachers and textbooks, and applied practice designed to educators. He also stressed civic education, training students to serve the state. Today, we don't believe that some people have a natural aptitude to speak. It just takes a lot of practice. You can look at things that people do have natural aptitude. If you're 6'8" and great at basketball, you can go far. If you're 5'8", you may have fun, but you're not going to go far. You don't have the height you need. Writing. People think that some people are just born with an ability to write, and that's not true at all. It's all about practice. Singing is something that you can work on, but I do think people are born with a natural aptitude to that. So those are the things. But he really stressed that all his students were going to go into civil service and work for Greece. Then we get to Plato. Plato is kind of a big deal, and I'm going to do it in like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, which would like make any philosophy teacher roll over in their grave. He hated the sophists. He hated them for 3 reasons. 1, he was an absolutist. 2, he thought they were slimy and they didn't care about the truth. And 3, he was fighting them for students. So an absolutist is someone who says, like let's say someone broke into my house last night and I just happen to have a gun. I don't have a gun, but let's say I did. And my children's lives were at stake and I was getting attacked and I shot that man or woman. That wouldn't be, yes, I murdered him, but in today's society we would say that was self-defense, right? He would say it's murder. And he got this through the dialectic method, which means a questioner can ask a question, but the answer can only answer yes or no. So in this case, he could say to me, well, Courtney, did you commit murder? And I can only answer yes or no, and I would say yes. Was there another way for you to go about the situation? Well, gosh, I guess I could have maybe put an extra lock on the door, or, I could come up with all these scenarios, but the answer would be yes. And so he would say, well, then you are a murderer, because that's the absolute truth. And that's an absolutist. There are very few people who are absolutists today. But he believed in timeless truths, and he got this from the world, sometimes called the theory of forms. So if you've seen The Matrix, this is it. Or if you've read Allegory of the Cave, this is it. He believes that somewhere up here, not like in my room, but up, our souls reside. And everything that we need to know is there. The truth, everything is perfect. And then we come down and we're born, and we forget a lot of stuff. And so by going through the dialectic, it can get us to remember what we once knew was true, a timeless truth. And then we die, and when we die, our souls go back. Sounds a little bit like modern day heaven, even though this is before the Bible was written. So that's what he believed, okay? So Plato was great because he taught Aristotle, and this is the man for our class. So Aristotle was Plato's student, but he he was like, dude, Plato, you're just a little too hardcore. Like, come on. And he hated the sophists. Aristotle hated the sophists because he thought, as many people now know, they didn't care about the truth. And he wanted to know the truth. So he believed in probable knowledge. He wrote a book called On Rhetoric, which is still the core knowledge today that most of us teach in critical thinking. He believed rhetoric was the art of finding the available persuasion. He wrote about the 7 virtues of style, the 7 dimensions of source credibility, arrangement, and delivery. But he also gave us, most importantly, ethos, pathos, and logos. So if you're following along, you'll see that ethos is the character of the speaker, its credibility, and it's what affects an audience's perception of a speaker. And I have this picture of Ethos water from Starbucks. You might recognize it, where they just flat out named it Ethos, which is kind of funny in many ways because this is how you don't make friends. I was in Starbucks a couple years ago, and some guy picked up and was like, Ethos? And I said, oh, that's Ethos. And then I went on and said, oh, it means the character of the speaker. So basically what Starbucks is saying is they have good ethos because, 2 cents or whatever of this bottled water goes to help people who need water. Which I don't actually think is great ethos, but they put it out there. Logos, in Aristotle's time, he believed it had to do with the speech itself, the organization, length, complexity, evidence, and rationale. Today, we look mainly at the evidence, complexity, and rationale. So, things like how reasonable and appropriate are the author's claims, given the rhetorical situation? How clear are the author's claims? Are the author's claims broad and sweeping, or does the author limit and qualify them? How well does the author use facts, statistics, and expert testimony to support his or her claims? Are the author's claims adequately explained? Does the author avoid lapses in reasoning? And you can read the rest. And that's how we look at logos today. We don't necessarily look at the organization. Organization's important, but we don't look at the length. But definitely the complexity, evidence, and rationale. Pathos, and this is a real picture if you're following along, it focuses on the characteristics of an audience and an appeal to the audience, usually in the form of emotions. The number one emotion that will get you to do almost anything, no matter how illogical it is an appeal to fear. Okay? Anything that makes us frightened, whenever we're frightened, all of our rational thinking goes out the window. And we're on pure adrenaline, and it's a fight or flight, or whatever the case may be. So we have to work really hard. But pathos also is important because you want your audience to feel something. Otherwise, without pathos and ethos, you're really reading just like your microwave oven directions. I mean, who reads those? Who reads any of that stuff? I mean, that could be why my speaker doesn't work, because I threw it away and thought I could figure it out myself. But basically, no. And then if you're following along, this vote yes on amendments 47, 49, and 54 is actually true. And that came out of, I think, Colorado. So take a look at that. So then we get to Aristotle's famous triangle. Ethos is at the top because it's the most important. And it's credibility, trust. Pathos is over on the right-hand side, if you're looking at this, emotions. And logos is consistency, logic, all that other stuff. We often say logos is logic, but there's more to it. You may have an essay that you wrote with amazing statistics, great research, but you're missing ethos and pathos, and we call that a logos dump. It's boring. Okay? Yeah, you may have established your credibility as you did great research, but there's nothing else there. And so that's why it's a triangle. It's equal. You have to have all three. And now we're on to the present day. Okay? So that was a quick run through the Greeks and what you need to know about them. Rhetoric is necessary because people disagree. Okay? That's all it is. We often think of arguments as, what you might see outside a bar late Saturday night or something like that, but it really is so much more. It's absolutely necessary because people disagree. And it's about communicating.